Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Trialogue's March webinar. We host these online forums monthly on the last Thursday of the month, so mark it on your calendars. Thank you. I see that we've got our attendees joining. Thank you for being with us this morning, taking time out of your busy schedules, no doubt, to be with us. I'm really excited about today's webinar and the topic that we're discussing. I think it's really important, and I think a lot of the developments that we've seen in the last couple of months really do speak to that as well. So it's Human Rights Month. As you know, last Friday was Human Rights Day, marking the Sharpeville massacre. So today we're going to look at how companies can contribute to human rights and social justice through CSI. But as you'll see as the conversation develops, you'll see that it's actually broader than CSI, and how companies seed it into their ecosystems as well, and across the full value chain of what they do. Now, the start of 2025 has been marked by seismic geopolitical developments and a wave of those decisions by US President Donald Trump's presidency and government, rocking many nation states, including our own, non-profit organizations and civil movements as well. Now, Trump's orders on aid funding, climate change, and diversity, equality, and inclusion threaten to marginalize tens of millions of people, if not more. And those moves have raised important questions around funding, human rights, and social justice as well. We've seen developments at American businesses, some of your biggest multinationals already, developments internally which aren't encouraging, to say the least. And just this morning, I saw an insert on Bloomberg on research that has found that draconian laws discriminating against LGBTQIA+ people have cost East African economies $5 billion a year. Now, that's because of absenteeism. That's because of mental health. That's because of healthcare costs. It's because of young, talented people fleeing their countries, and contributing to other economies because they don't feel safe in the countries that they live in. And that's a social justice, a human right matter as well, which has clear indications and clear costs, not just in terms of socially, but clearly now economically as well, as research such as that comes through. Now, with this in mind, I'm looking forward to today's discussion as we unpack how corporates can advance human rights and social justice through their CSI strategies, but more broadly through their business ecosystems as well. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their insight and time with us, and thanks to you, our audience, for joining us this morning. Our monthly webinars are now 90 minutes, giving us more time to delve into the really important topics we deal with each month. A few technical points in housekeeping before we begin. There are two ways for you to engage on this call. You're welcome to use the chat function to connect with your fellow delegates and share your thoughts on content. We also encourage you to ask questions, though, through the session. And you can do that by using the Q&A function rather than the chat box. So if we keep the Q&A function for the questions, I will draw questions from the Q&A box as well for our panelists to respond to your questions, your concerns, your thoughts in the discussion section of this webinar. So please direct the questions to one or more of the panelists and keep it as brief as possible. And then just there's a short survey which will pop up at the end of the session. Please do share your thoughts here so that we're able to improve these sessions and focus on topics that are of particular interest to you. And then finally, the session is being recorded, and an article and a recording will be made available to everyone who registered, and that will be sent out to you next week. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. A quick indication of our agenda for this morning. After my brief introduction, I'll be handing over to each of our panelists for their opening comments. We'll then dive into the discussion section, and our panelists will answer some of your questions from the Q&A box. Each panelist will then give a short closing comment to wrap up our discussion today. Now, the first poll will appear on your screen now. We'd like to know which organization, type of organization you represent. That's just popped up now. This will help our panelists and I shape the discussion to make it as effective and tailored for you. I'll leave that up for a minute as you put your answers through. Great to see those coming through. Thank you. Around 56, 55, 57% of you represent nonprofit organizations. Good to see representation from big business, small and medium businesses as well. We've got a couple of consultants, academics, others. I do know we had government representatives who had registered as well. So it's great for them to be a part of the conversation. So we have those come through. Thank you very much for sharing that. Let me share those. There we go. Okay. Let's move on. So I see a couple of familiar names on the call, but there are also many new ones. So welcome to our CSI Nonprofit Network. A special welcome if you're a first timer. I'd like to take some time just to tell you a bit about Trialogue. We're one of only a few consultancies that focuses exclusively on responsible business. We do this through our consulting services as well as through our knowledge sharing platforms, all of which aim to make CSI in South Africa more effective. So the two main types of consulting that we do are CSI strategy development and monitoring and evaluation. On our knowledge sharing platforms, we've got our annual Business in Society conference, and that's on the horizon. It's a red letter event in the industry, and that takes place on the 13th and 14th of May at the Galleria in Sandton under the theme Driving Impact, Inspiring Change. So we're really looking at impact and the various aspects of it across the CSI industry. And then if you want more information on that, visit the conference page. It is on the Trialogue website for more information on the program, the masterclasses which take place on the Monday, and then to book your place as well. I can tell you that our opening keynote address this year will be delivered by Busisiwe Mavuso, someone who's played an integral role in speaking up from businesses' perspective and also pushing the envelope for business to be a responsible citizen in South Africa. Now, you may know our conference and our Business in Society handbook really well. Those are flagship platforms, but I'd like to share more about the Trialogue Knowledge Hub with you. The write-up and the recording of today's webinar will be uploaded to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, and if you just take a minute to find out more about it. I'd like to introduce you to the Trialogue Knowledge Hub, the leading information resource for social investors in Africa. The Knowledge Hub builds on Trialogue's deep knowledge and research-based strategy, which underpins the more established Business in Society handbook and conference. It's a unique repository of specialist information available for free to companies, non-profit organizations, governments, and scholars of African corporate social investment and responsible business. Since its launch in 2017, it has grown its coverage on a range of responsible business topics, including collaboration and shared value, showcasing the latest research, case studies, and insights. The Knowledge Hub offers a number of features, including articles, case studies, and expert opinions offering valuable and in-depth information, development sector sections that demonstrate how and why to invest with case studies and examples backed up by research, an industry leaders tab profiling companies and showcasing their CSI and responsible business objectives and initiatives, along with their news, insights, and case studies. A section featuring resources, guidance, and tips specifically for non-profit organizations. An NPO directory, which features an accessible and easy-to-use list of South African NPOs. A function to search by development sector or responsible business topic, together with a search tool making it simpler to find what you need. Visit the Knowledge Hub today and become a stronger social impact leader. Now let's start diving into the context of today's discussion. Thank you very much for that, and you can get more on the Knowledge Hub as well. So now, we're going to put up the second poll, which now starts to speak to today's topic. What would make corporate leaders more willing to engage in corporate in social justice advocacy? And the reason we ask that is because the research shown from our latest edition of the Business and Society Handbook is that, there's very little comparative support for social justice and human rights initiatives, programs, and obviously advocacy as well. So I'll leave that up for a minute. We have those votes coming through. Thank you. That's great. Clearly, a lot of thinking around clearer business benefits and return on investment. We've also got stronger stakeholder demand. So clearly being driven, by employees, customers, investors, other stakeholders, government incentives and regulatory support, reduction in politicization of social justice initiatives, seeing successful case studies from peers. I think that's really important to see that coming through. Thank you very much. We'll now share those results of that poll. Now, as we have those up, I think that's a good place for us to contextualize today's conversation briefly. Corporate responsibility regarding human rights and social justice is very broad, right? And it applies to an organization's entire value chain. Its employees, supply chains, customers, communities as well. And, we see this with mining houses and communities that they, work in, ICT companies and digital rights as well. So there are really good examples of it to build on. And CSI is just one small part of how companies can contribute to closing that gap. And a good work framework, I'm stealing here from Gugu McLaren from the National Business Initiative. She previously said that a good framework and a good way to think of this is for companies to think about their sphere of influence, and the starting place would be internal, would be the workplace with your employees, because that's where you have more control and can directly address issues like pay, discrimination, health and safety, right? And the broader societal context is that South Africa has a deep history of inequality and human rights struggles. Now, while the country has made significant strides since the end of apartheid, major socio-economic disparities still persist, and you can just look at our Gini coefficient compared to other countries where it is measured. We are the most unequal society in the world for countries where the Gini coefficient is measured, right? Partly because of issues such as high unemployment, poverty, unequal access to basic services continue to hinder progress towards social justice. And just an indicator, where we talk about broadly corporate human rights, we've got the 2023 Corporate Human Rights Benchmark, and that shows that globally, that while many companies surveyed since 2017 are making progress in their support of human rights, the progression from commitment to actions remains slow. So that's something for us to think about as well. As I'd mentioned, South Africa's Gini coefficient around 0.67, 0.63, around that, according to the World Bank. So while we've seen, again, small incremental improvements on that, still, we can all agree that it's not where it's meant to be. Unemployment figures, always coming out. The current unemployment rate around 32%. That's, disproportionately affecting younger people and marginalized community there. And if we look at civil protest as well, the latest numbers from Municipal IQ showing that South Africa experienced 198 service delivery protests in 2023, and mainly driven by issues such as electricity blackouts, water shortages, and other municipal service failures as well. So really important topics for us to think about as well. And this is not even touching on gender-based violence, which affects us all in society, whether in our organizations or society at large as well. Now, when we look at the role of business in addressing these issues, let's just look briefly at the CSI support. And this comes out of our 2024 Business and Society Handbook research. You can see there, support for social justice, quite low, a slight improvement that we've seen year on year, but still, if you compare it to the other CSI support areas, other development sectors, you can see it's quite low there. And often, the basis of a good quality life is human rights and equal social justice, right? So if we look at CSI and responsible businesses practices, they play a crucial role in advancing human rights and social justice there. And it's important to note that the South African Human Rights Commission actually emphasizes that businesses should align with Section 24 of the Constitution, which guarantees rights to dignity, equality, and basic human needs in that front. And when we're looking at support, for instance, within social justice, just quickly before we turn to the discussion, research in the handbook shows that social justice and advocacy was supported through CSI by 20% of companies. So that's encouraging. But in terms of the actual CSI expenditure, receiving only 2% of that average CSI spend there. And if we look at one aspect of it, media freedom, and we know how important media freedom has been, across our society from various big moments and developments in our history as well. Media freedom receiving the smallest portion of spend in the sector at 1%, notably down from 4% in 2023. And I must say that in my previous life as a news editor and journalist, Kirsten, attending the Standard Bank Sikovile awards, I know the support that we've had, the media's had from companies like Standard Bank has been vital, and I can tell you it's been vital in terms of supporting the media and being able to do their work under often trying economic and social conditions as well. And I think that's a great point to introduce the panelists for today: Dr. Kirsten Greenop, Head of Corporate Citizenship at Standard Bank; Sasha Stevenson, the Executive Director of Section 27; and Yoni Bas, the Director of Resource Mobilization at the Social Justice Initiative right there. I'm going to put up the third poll quickly while our panelists start addressing us there. How should companies measure the impact of their social justice investments? As I mentioned, impact is an important topic and the theme of our conference coming up in May this year. And I think it's an important one to look at when we look at corporate social investment as well. Okay, so those coming through, thank you very much. Thank you to those who've joined us since we've kicked off as well. So economic upliftment of affected communities coming through there. Long-term systemic changes in key sectors. I think that's very important, changing the outlook that we have in terms of impact measurement. I think the long term is really important there. Policy or legislative changes being influenced. Another strong one coming through there as well. Okay, we'll share those results. Thank you very much. Kirsten, let me kick off with you. Let me come to you, Head of Corporate Citizenship at Standard Bank. How does Standard Bank support social justice and human rights? And why does it believe it's important to do so?
So Sheldon, I think it's a very, very difficult question to answer because it's so systemic. And I'm going to actually shout out a challenge right now. And you have mentioned it in your introduction. There is a disconnect between what people understand social justice to be in the abstract form and actually practically what happens and how and the implementation thereof. And I think that we've got a lot of translation to do between the organizations, people, professionals who work in social justice, and then, for example, the organizations that would support social justice. So big corporate CSI programs, maybe their social responsibility programs. So I just want to shout out that as our initial framing point, because I think it's absolutely essential for us to know, and you've seen it in the polls that have come through. People will gravitate and they are more likely to be able to identify a particular educational program, a particular socio-economic development program in job creation than they are to say, I'm dealing with human rights, or human rights as a one of the fundamental aspects underpins everything that we do as a business. And so there's a little bit of translation awareness that we need to do. And I think we've got the right people in the room to have this conversation and to also get that across. But just back to your question in terms of how the bank does it, how Standard Bank does it, is we take a view and unashamedly the same as what Gugu was saying. So I can't say I stole it from Gugu, but I completely agree with Gugu, the point that you put out in terms of the framework you have to use. We look at it as our people, our business, and society. 3 areas. Try keep it as simple as possible in our business. Where are we advancing social justice and human rights? Is it in the particular focus areas that we have? But it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. So for example, if you're a bank or a mining company, it's the type of business that you do. It's the type for a bank, the type of lending that you do, the type of support you provide to your own people, the promotion of particular rights, promotion of gender equity, LGBTQI equity, other forms of equity. These are the types of things that you have to be very deliberate about in your people. But then in your market, in the business that you do, what kind of business do you do? And are you making sure that you're doing it in the right way? So you could say, yes, I'm working in a particular area that is going to have a wonderful human benefits, but are you doing it the right way? And how are you measuring that? Which is, I think, one of the things that also the Trialogue Business and Society book was talking about, the booklet was speaking about, is that measurement aspect, which I think is so important. But then over and above that, and this tends to be where CSI comes in, is we look at it in society. So as a responsible corporate, as a member of society, what are we doing in society to be able to promote human rights, social justice? What are we doing to be able to say, so for example, are you supporting particular NGOs, not-for-profits, organizations that are advocating for human rights? And are you doing so in a way that is fair and transparent and without any interference in their actions? Because that's very, very important. You cannot dictate an action just because you're supporting a particular NGO. Inherently, their role is to question, to advocate, to push. This is what they're good at. This is how they do that. And how do you actually how do you support them in a way that is done with a basis of social justice as well? So you can't be dictatorial in any sense of the word. This has to be the fundamental role of activist organizations and NGOs. And then in society is, how does society hold corporates to account? How do we get that back again to be able to say, where is the feedback? How are we measuring impact? Do we know we're doing the right thing? Are we on the right track? And then what do we do? This is fundamental. What do we do when we get something wrong? And where do we go and how do we respond and act to that? And it's about the dialogue that we have with our communities, with our NGO sector, with government departments, all of those legs on the table that create a strong society. And I think, Sheldon, I think you're absolutely right. I think, if I had to leave with a couple of things that I think we need to do better. First thing is we need to be able to understand and identify where we're dealing with social justice and human rights. Do you have a clear statement? Do you know where it's active in your organization? You may actually be doing it, but you don't call it that. All right. So be able to identify it, be able to say where it's happening, and then be able to call out where it's not happening and where it's not being promoted. Then two, the other thing we need to do is to take an active stance in translating what that means for businesses, because they're not in the business of what not-for-profits and NGOs are in. They don't understand that language. It's learning a new language. How do we translate that and to make sure that the bridge is crossed? And then three, what are you putting behind your active promotion of things such as promotion of organizations that will fight for social justice and human rights and hold us all accountable? And those are the three action points that I think we need to honestly ask ourselves as business.
Thank you, Dr. Greenock there. Sasha, I want to come to you now, and I think Kirsten touches on an important point, and I can certainly identify with it. When we I pushed for us to have a social justice reporter. But even in us defining that, we're like, okay, but what areas would the person cover? Because you've got education, you've got all these beats, but what would they cover? From Section 27's point of view, I mean, you're a prominent figure and organization within this sphere, advancing social justice and human rights. From your perspective, how do you define social justice?
Yeah, what a question, Sheldon. It's great to be here and to be having this really important conversation. And maybe I can start answering your question by what we do as Section 27 for those who don't know, and try and do some of that translation that Kirsten referred to, and perhaps that'll go some way towards defining social justice. So, I mean, as people on the call may know, Section 27 is a human rights law organization. And what we do is we use the Constitution, and particularly the right to healthcare services and basic education, to catalyze social justice. So what does this actually mean? It means that when a little boy, Michael Komape, falls in a pit toilet at school in Limpopo and drowns, we assist the family not only to get damages, but also to ensure that all unsafe pit toilets are removed from schools in Limpopo and are replaced. It means that we use the law to train 4,000 school learners about sexual violence and what to do if it happens to you, while also making sure that perpetrators don't continue to work in schools. It means that when Gauteng Health decides to move vulnerable mental health care users out of Life Esidimeni into unsafe places where 144 of them die in conditions of horrible neglect, we work with families to get justice, including through improvements to the mental health care system, so this kind of thing doesn't happen again, through compensation, and importantly, through an inquest finding that the former MEC for health in the province and the former director of mental health can be prosecuted for culpable homicide for their roles in the deaths. And it means that when the National School Nutrition Program gets stopped during COVID, we, together with partners, litigated to get it restarted again so that the 9.6 million children who rely on it every school day for a meal can get fed, and also improve the program for years to come so that millions more learners benefit from it. So what we are doing and other social justice focused organizations are doing is not just helping a handful of the millions of people who experience rights violations of their rights to health and education and food and housing and other rights every day, but we're trying to change systems so that fewer people have to experience these violations. And this work is fundamentally important. It creates systemic change. It gives South Africans hope in the power of the Constitution. And that hope and that power is so pivotal in a time of populism and hopelessness. It contributes to strengthening the rule of law, the rule of law that we all rely on. And it contributes to securing a society and an economy that's stable and sustainable. And it means better health and education systems and other systems, which creates a healthier and a more educated workforce, good for corporates, good for government, good for the whole economy. So at Section 27, we've been doing this for 30 years. We know what we're doing. We only litigate when all other tools, and we have a lot of tools that we use, have failed. And we work with government much more than we sue them. It's just that you don't often see the collaborative work that is the bulk of what we do. But unfortunately, as people have referred to already, it's work that corporates often shy away from. You know, everyone I speak to has real admiration for this work. I can't count the number of times that friends and colleagues in corporate South Africa have expressed how inspired they are by our work and how important it is to the country. And yet, despite this obvious value, there's reticence to support it. And the problem, of course, is that we can't do this work without support. The recent drastic cuts to foreign funding, notably from the US, but not unfortunately just from the US, also from the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland, mean that the work is both more needed because there's now more, there are more issues that are emerging and more difficult to do and more difficult to fund. So we're in a really difficult position. And I think one of the things that I'd like to get across is that it's just how important it is for us to have local funding, both for the purposes of sustainability, but also to demonstrate local buy-in and investment to resolving local problems. South Africans and South African companies need to support the tackling of the root causes of our issues, including inequality and corruption and the failure to live up to the values we profess in the Constitution. You know, there's always been this difficulty for corporates in funding and supporting this kind of work. But I think it's notable that toward the end of the Zuma presidency, corporate South Africa started to see the imperative of supporting civil society organizations that were fighting directly against the corruption and the attendant inequality that's brought the country to its knees. And there was this recognition at that point that corporate South Africa needs to play, of the role that corporate South Africa needs to play in making the country better for everyone who lives in it, and by doing more than sticking to its traditional roles. And also, I think there was recognition of the risk to South Africa if that didn't happen. But unfortunately, since then, with changes in presidents, the courage to stand up seems to have waned. And unfortunately, we're at another precipice moment now. This moment is largely triggered from abroad, but the result is the same, and the result is dire. In the coming months, health services provision will get worse, and people will die. Many people will die. Health research will likely stop unless there's an intervention. GBV support will be severely dented. And at this point, government is doing nothing to mitigate it. Now, of course, corporate South Africa can't take over responsibility, and they shouldn't take over responsibilities of government or of foreign aid funding. But what corporate South Africa can do is support the pushback. It can support access to justice. It can support work to make the system, restructured as it will need to be, work better for everyone. So you'll be unsurprised to hear that I think corporate support for social justice is needed by social justice organizations, but it also makes sense for corporates. We can't afford to fail to deal with the root causes of South Africa's problems. Doing so makes the whole system worse, makes other interventions worse, it makes other interventions not work. Your employees and your consumers, as we saw in the poll, expect better. Employees in your own organization, your own family members, your own friends are likely themselves facing rights violations. 1 in 3 women in South Africa face gender-based violence. It costs business, apart from all the horrific rights violations that it entails. KPMG conservatively estimated the cost of GBV to the country at 28 to 48 billion rand. And of course, while corporates don't need to be the face of the struggles for education, food, housing, environmental rights, and others, that doesn't mean they can't and shouldn't support those who are the face of those struggles. So just finally, you know, without increasing South African support to South African social justice, what we stand for as a country is at real risk. And what you stand for as corporates and those who are interested in socioeconomic development is at real risk. It's bad for constitutionalism, it's bad for rights, and it's also bad for business.
Thanks for that, Sasha. Very sobering, but also giving us a clearer indication and idea of social justice, how how it's defined from Section 27's perspective, the important role you play as well. And I think I really like what you said about not necessarily having to be the face. There's the support behind it. So I think that's would be a very good way for corporates to look at it, to say, look, we don't have to be the face, but it's important to play a role in supporting those organizations who are the face, such as yourself. And another good point around the collaboration with government, and I think the media is partly to blame here, because you frame it as when there's a conflict of sort. But as you mentioned, there's a lot more collaboration, a lot more working with government than the conflict which comes about with litigation as well. Yoni, I want to come to you from your perspective at the Social Justice Initiative, and I think we're getting a really better picture of what social justice is and just how broad the umbrella is as well. So from the Social Justice Initiative's perspective and the work that you do to drive social justice, human rights, advocacy, how does that play out? How do you support social justice and human rights at the initiative?
Thanks, Sheldon, and thanks for having me on today. So how the SJI works is quite simple. We ensure that the organizations at the cutting edge of the issues that have been mentioned today are properly resourced. The SJI at its core believes that a just and equitable South Africa is possible. And our role at the SJI isn't to implement that work directly, but it's to but rather we're a philanthropic organization, and we aim to stimulate the flow of resources to civil society. Sasha has just spoken about all the various things that need to be done, the critical points that we are at. And our approach is looking at the people and organizations who are at the forefront of that work and saying, how can we make sure that they are properly capacitated and resourced to do the work that they need to do? There are remarkable organizations in South Africa who have had a huge impact on this country and have changed the lives of poor and marginalized people. And I just wanted to mention a few because it's important to understand what this work results in. Without an organization like the Treatment Action Campaign, millions of people would have died of AIDS in South Africa, millions of more people. Earth Life Africa prevented South Africa from a ruinous nuclear deal with Russia. The economic situation we would have been in were it not for them would have been dire. Sasha mentioned it earlier, but without Section 27 and equal education, 9 million learners wouldn't have received school nutrition during COVID. There were reports at the time of learners, because of lockdown, going hungry. Those organizations ensured that people got fed, and at a critical moment too. And so we see it as our job that organizations like this are able to be resilient and function effectively. And by the way, Sasha's touched on this, but corporates benefit from this, both from living in a more just and fair society, which is something that they and their employees would obviously want. But it's also because doing this work leads to healthier and stronger markets. It leads to a better economy. It leads to businesses being able to do their core business better. And so the link as to why corporates should be interested in this, for me, is absolutely clear. And I just want to speak a little bit about the SJI also, which is that we exist to help corporates navigate this space. That's a key element of our work, our reason for existing. And we do it in 3 ways that I just want to briefly mention. One is that we provide direct advice to companies so that they can navigate funding in this space. There's a lot of talk on this call about translation. SJI is the translator. We are an intermediary that bridges between the social justice sector and corporate South Africa. The second way that we do it is that we will run discretionary funds, which companies can contribute to directly if they align with their philanthropic strategy. And in these funds, because we manage and select grantees and aim for an impact on a variety of important issues, we, the SJI, are the primary party involved in design making. And so we take the direct risk away from corporates who are concerned about what they might perceive as various risks in supporting social justice work. If they are nervous about that, fine. SJI will stand in their shoes and take the risk for them. And the final, and sorry, before I go on, just to say that there's two discretionary funds that we run. The first is something that we call the New Futures Fund, which supports organizations that work towards increasing public participation, promoting accountability, and strengthening governance structures. And by investing in this, we aim to foster a culture of informed engagement and ensure governance structures are responsive to the needs of all South Africans. And the second fund that we run is something called the Resilient Communities Fund. And that's a fund that primarily enables smaller community-based organizations operating in rural, peri-rural, and peri-urban settings to address systemic social, political, and economic challenges within their communities, leveraging their agency and fostering grassroots-driven solutions. So that's the second way that we assist corporates. And then the third and final way is that we set up donor-advised funds with corporates. And here, what we do is we design a bespoke fund with a donor, ensuring that it's designed in a manner that has impact and matches the impact goal of a corporate, but also ensuring that it is designed in a manner that is responsive to real or perceived risks within that corporate. And this bespoke approach really is excellent in ensuring that corporates are able to achieve their impact goals, whilst also ensuring that they are able to, beforehand and during, manage any real or perceived risks that may emerge from funding in the social justice space. I think the thing that I wanted to say is, perhaps this will come up more in questions later, but what I wanted to end on is that I think we're at a time where some of the perceived risks, particularly in South Africa around social justice, are at a lower ebb than they were previously. This country is now governed by a coalition. Political power is much more equitably distributed around the country. The consequences that corporates face, at least from the state, I think is much more diluted than it ever was before. And this is a real opportunity for corporates to directly live their values and fund for a more just and equitable South Africa. I hope it comes up in some of the questions that you asked me, but I have some suggestions as to how corporates can think about this in a way that allows their CSI work to be maintained, but also works towards long-term systemic change in South Africa and that responds to the many substantive challenges that our country faces. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Yoni, and that certainly will. In fact, I'll come back to you in a bit. I want to start to contextualize some of the perceived risks. And Sasha, I want to come to you here in terms of, from your perspective and obviously engaging with corporates as well. What are some of the risks that SA corporates, the perceived risks from their aspect in terms of them being hesitant to support social justice strategies and programs?
I mean, it seems like some of the fears, Sheldon, are concerns that supporting this work will make them look anti-government, or will involve them in controversial issues. Those seem to be some of the concerns that are faced. And I think the reality really is that there are very few real social justice organizations that are actually anti-government. As I said, there's usually a real attempt to work with government as much as possible. So while of course sometimes we are litigating against government or advocating against government policies, that is done in a context, firstly, of attempts at engagement, and secondly, from the perspective of standing up for constitutional rights, which is quite a different thing to developing a sort of adversarial relationship with government. I think the other concern is that corporates don't want to be sort of alone in supporting an organization that might be involved in some controversial things. And I think the reality really is that you never would be. Most social justice organizations are funded mainly through philanthropic giving, and also through aggregators like the SJI, although there are some corporates who do support social justice work. And, I haven't heard of blowback experienced by corporates from supporting that work. In fact, there tends to be a lot of credit. The other credit given to organizations supporting that work. The other thing is that CSOs are extensively audited and regulated. We are regulated through Department of Social Development and others, but also we are audited a lot. We do our own organizational audits. Many donors do their own audits. Our donors, whether they are philanthropic or other types of donors, are fastidious. And so that means that that your money is being well spent, and that some of the concerns that corporates may have about where the money is going are really not real concerns, because those risks are taken care of. So I think there are these worries, these reputational concerns, but really those are very largely mitigated. And the experience of Standard Bank and to an extent Massmart and other corporates, some law firms, will show that there hasn't been the kind of reputational or other risks that some are concerned about.
Okay. Yoni, to come back to you and on your point in terms of how corporates and some of your ideas around how corporates can do that, what are some of those? I think that would be very helpful now that we've, learned, what I'm hearing coming through is those risks being de-risked as such, and actually the reality being that those risks aren't as real as maybe perceived. How can corporates work around that to ensure that there is the support for social justice and human rights?
Well, I think the direct answer is to start incorporating this into their philanthropic strategy. And the only way that you understand this is to start having conversations either through organizations such as the SJI or directly with organizations like Sasha. And what I would propose is this kind of thinking. The first is that many corporates run amazing CSI impact programs which focus on changing the lives of very specific communities. We're providing education support. We're building infrastructure. And from our perspective, we wouldn't want corporates to stop doing that. But we would want corporates to think about what sustainable philanthropy for them looks like. I think we would have to accept that corporates cannot stand in the shoes of the state and provide services that the state should provide indefinitely. And so unless corporates wish to be doing these things forever, they also have to invest in initiatives that prevent their necessity in the first place. So you have to do philanthropy that de-necessitates your philanthropy in the future. And how do you do that? You invest in social justice interventions which focus on systemic interventions and changing and solving the problems that cause you to be needed in the first place. And so what I would propose very simply to corporates in their CSI strategy, a very easy entry-level way to funding in the space, is adopt a 70-30 approach. Focus 70% of your philanthropy on the interventions that are providing direct help to people in need, but set aside 30% of your philanthropic giving for having to focusing on long-term systemic interventions led by some of the organizations that have been mentioned today. That will make sure, on top of everything else, that the philanthropy that you are directly doing also is sustained in other ways. So, for example, if you build a school library in a school, you want to make sure that that building is maintained, that books are restocked. The system has to do that, unless you are planning to do that for the next 150 years. So it actually helps your project have more impact at that level. And if you realize that, oh, actually, we can see how we are able to scale our impact for our social justice giving beyond just the communities that we're supporting. Now we're impacting at a provincial level or a national level. Slowly, you will realize that maybe you can increase your social justice giving by a few percentage points. And so start safe, but try it out. And you will see how this positive feedback loop starts to exist that really enhances your philanthropic strategy and giving overall.
Thank you, Yoni. Kirsten, from Standard Bank's perspective, how important is the role of leadership in driving that corporate social advocacy? We've spoken about the sphere of influence. So internally, obviously employing engagement, how does it impact that? How important is leadership, and how does it play out in Standard Bank?
So fundamental. So I think as a single word answer, it would be absolutely fundamental. But also not just leadership from the top, but let's also take into account stakeholder employee pressure from all levels. This is not something that is outside of corporate. Everybody belongs to the society, to the community in which they operate in. But fundamentally, in terms of corporates, if you go back to whichever corporate you're sitting in, whichever business it may be, maybe small, medium, large enterprise, go back to your ultimate purpose, which is to be there to actually create value. And if you cannot create value in a society which is crumbling, then everybody loses. It's a lose-lose situation. So to the points that Johnny and Sasha were making, it's about looking at the system. Look at the total value chain and where you fit into the system and what your role is. So we cannot all be social advocates, right? We cannot all be activists, but what we can do is we can support the action that takes. We can be able to say, so what does corporate South Africa have in place that is able to move the dial? And where is that catalytic point where it can happen? I absolutely love the point about saying that try find programs that are getting you systemic change. Find programs that you know are going to change the system. Don't find things that are going to be a plaster over something that is as it happens. And we know that people are very knee-jerk reaction. You want to respond very quickly to fix certain problems. But I love the idea, and I really want to promote the idea of set aside your thinking of certain things, maybe strategic programs that are important for the business organization, but that they're underpinned by something that is affecting the whole system, that you're working on the system. If you are dealing with education, what are you doing in terms of supporting programs that advocate for particular curriculum, teacher, system, infrastructure changes in that system? If you're dealing with health, what are the particular programs that you're looking at there? So it doesn't mean that you have to be everywhere for everyone, but look at the purpose of your organization. And if the purpose of the organization is to be leading to a certain level of growth in a particular sector, focus yourself there. And then the leadership buy-in is absolutely essential. And usually it's not just leadership buy-in. That seems to be like, I'm selling something. Usually what happens is that it's coming from leaders themselves. They're like, we can see is struggling. We are working in a situation or a system which we know can be improved. I know that our business does X, Y, Z. What can we do? How else can we do it? And in what manner can we get this done? And so this is where then your opening for the discussion happens. You then are able to say, well, I know, like I know a Yoni, I know a Sasha, I know a PMG, I know a number of organizations who can help us in our thinking, not just in CSI, but also in how we do the business that we do. So CSI, absolutely fundamental, and I love it as Paul like putting it in part of the system of business. But then let's think beyond that as well, to say that the expertise that these organizations have in terms of how we impact society and the communities in which we operate in is something that they have been growing for years and years and years. And as a particular business, for example, that is, producing gadget X, you may not have that because, that's your level of expertise. But what expertise we all have in common is that we want to be in a society that's actually functioning holistically and are accountable. So to find that common ground. So Sheldon, yes, fundamental buy-in from the top, but also accountability and pressure from all of the stakeholders.
Now, Sasha, when we look at CSI support across South Africa, I mean, I think Yoni, you touched on it perfectly to say, look, corporates can't do everything. Firstly, they can't do everything. Number one. Number two, resources are limited, and it's not a case of replacing the state, right? The state still has a lot of might behind it, both in terms of reach and resources as well, and what it should be doing. But Sasha, when we look at CSI support, right, and we look at what is being done, a lot of work is being done, for instance, in education. We mentioned GBV, so a lot around that. There's social and community development as well. Is it a case of the framing of, for instance, social justice, and that there is support out there, but it may just be classified in another development sector as such, or is it a case of, what would you advocate specifically to say, actually, we need to do more in terms of the spending on social justice and particular initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll be unsurprised to hear me say, I think it's both and, I think there is, as Kirsten said initially, there is this work, social justice work and social justice thinking is happening across corporates, across the sector. Some money that's put into traditional CSI spend does contribute to social justice, absolutely. But there is this higher, this bigger level, this kind of meta picture that I think is what we are speaking about mostly today. And I think that really Yoni answered this question largely when he said, in order to make the individual project CSI funding sustainable, we have to be dealing with these systemic issues. So I think it is important that corporates, and frankly, all donors and all actors, because it isn't just about donation, but it's also about involvement in the social justice ecosystem, is looking at both individual projects, assistance to individuals and communities that may be within your corporate group of stakeholders or within the community in which you're working. But also, how are we going to maintain that? How are we going to get the kind of the sort of side effects of that investment and kind of multiply that investment? I mean, an example, and we've talked a little bit about the school nutrition program work, and I think it's been mentioned a few times because it's so fundamental and because it fits also very well with a lot of CSI funding. A lot of corporates are interested in school feeding and in child feeding because we know it's so fundamental to making this country work. But that work was important because of the immediate impact that it had, but also what we've seen in the years subsequent to the judgment was, firstly, the judgment required constant reporting to the court, which means departments of education had to measure their program in a way they didn't before. And through that measurement and reporting, the program itself improved. So it has these kind of multiplier effects. And in addition, one of the benefits is that because this was during COVID, and for some learners, it was necessary for there to be the provision of food parcels as opposed to cooked meals at schools because learners are going to and from schools on different days. what's now been included in the funding model for the National School Nutrition Program is a provision for different modes of feeding in emergency situations. That was key for COVID, but it's also frankly key for climate change, because at the moment we see flooding in KZN, and from being in Joburg in the last couple of days, we can imagine some more flooding here. And those are circumstances in which schools are not operating, and there might be need for alternative methods of feeding and therefore of procurement. And we didn't have that before, and now we do. So it has this multiplier effect that works both at the individual level and the systemic level. And to get the impact we want, we need to be thinking at both levels.
Okay. I want to turn to some questions from the Q&A, and thank you to our attendees for the questions that you've posed. Just a reminder, if you can, pop those questions into the Q&A box and I'll draw from there. Yoni, let me come to you. I'm going to go to a question from Dominique, and actually I want to put it to you as well, Kirsten, from the corporate perspective. But Yoni, you know, Dominique writes, and she says there appears to be a disconnect between the ideology, language, and priorities of corporates and the human rights and social justice sector, noting even sometimes even between the corporates and their CSI divisions or structures. What do you see as strategies to bring these areas together so that there's a strong and united focus in improving human rights and social justice in SA and elsewhere? Yoni, let me kick off with you and your perspective from the SJI.
Yeah, my approach to this question is that I think some of this process is corporates thinking very carefully about their strategy, coming to some appropriate realizations about risk, and stepping their toes into the water. I think that they will find non-profit organizations who are able to translate their work in a way that gives corporates comfort. They will obviously also find organizations that they're not aligned with. That's fine. There's many social justice organizations out there, and I can promise corporates that there are ones that will completely align with their strategy and with their values. Unfortunately, in this scenario, corporates are going to have to be a bit brave, I think. They're going to have to make the first move in a sense. And the reason why I can say that to you is because I know that organizations like Sasha are knocking on the door. They have been knocking at the door. And what they need is someone to answer. And, you know, the people on this call can help corporates feel more confident about getting those answers. I know that the SJI is, for example, set up perfectly to help corporates bridge that gap that Dominic is asking about in her question. And so if the willingness comes from corporate South Africa, and we're willing, the SJI is willing, we're not, and I should maybe say this because I didn't say it earlier, we're not a business. We're not in this to make money off corporates. Far from it. Our entire reason for existing is to ensure that organizations like Sasha's are properly resourced. So knock on our door, speak to us. We know there's not going to be a bill coming after that conversation. We can talk to you about how to bridge a divide that is there. And Sasha is probably a better place to talk about this, but nonprofits have been having extensive internal conversations about how they engage corporate South Africa. They are thinking very deeply about these issues. And so my challenge to corporate South Africa, if there are CSI professionals on this call, is to start having those conversations internally. And where you reach a place that you feel like you want to engage beyond your internal structures, come and talk to people like the people on this call, and we are going to help you to find organizations and support organizations in the sector that perfectly aligns with your philanthropic strategy.
Okay. Kirsten, turning to you and from the perspective of Standard Bank as a corporate as well, what are your thoughts to Dominique's question, around the disconnect or apparent disconnect between ideology, language, and priorities of corporates and the human rights and social justice sector as well? What do you see as strategies to bring these areas together so that there's a strong and united focus in improving human rights?
Yeah, and I think it really is the million-dollar question. It's about how you get it right. It's almost like the CSI professionals are advocating internally, right? So it's like taking an internal advocacy position and looking for the manner in which you can promote and also drive this conversation internally, which means that you're not just externally focused, you're also internally focused in terms of how you work with the organization's values systems, governance systems. And you're well placed as a CSI professional to know what those are. So immediately you know what the bureaucracy of your own organization is. So you can use that to be able to say, this is how I'm going to position the argument that we have here. And I'd say that yes, you need the expertise of Yoni, for instance. You absolutely need to be able to have that expertise if you don't come from the sector yourself. You need to be able to say and to have that high level view of how it can fit into an organization. Have the conversations, talk to your colleagues, talk to the type of communities in which we operate in to be able to say that. But then be able to be the internal translator. So now I was talking earlier about the translator between the sector and corporates. Be able to be the internal translator to be able to say, for our business XYZ, this is why it's important to us. Be 100% sure that you're able to show the reasons why we are doing this and what the impacts are going to be. We've had a number of examples listed in our conversation today about where the impact actually is. And you're able to say, what does levels of poverty, levels of unemployment, gender-based violence, what is the impact that it's having on our communities? Make it concrete, make it specific, make it very, very clear, especially if to your sector, to your area, your business area. And then very, very, very clearly, I cannot emphasize this enough, link it to the business purpose. Link it to don't make it a side of desk issue. This is not something extra we do. This is something that is inherent in who we are as a corporate or as a business. This is a community in which we operate in, right? Same as if you are a single individual operating in a community. So link it to the purpose. So find that purpose. So a couple of levels here, what I'm trying to get at, and I think there's a number of strategies, is use the organizational structure that you have there. Link it to the purpose. Make sure that it is a strategic focus of the business. So the strategic focus or priority of the business is to expand into area XYZ, to manufacture ABC, etc. That's true, but in what context? And how are we going to look at that context to be able to say that we're going to be here in the next 20, 50, 100 years? And I think all of us let's use the opportunities of the conversations that we're having in the country right now. Things such as the impacts of climate change, what a just energy transition looks like, how this actually manifests, what does it really mean? Have these difficult conversations. And if you don't have it on the agenda of the top level leaders of your organization, it needs to get there. If you don't have a social and ethics committee, it needs to be the executive committee. These are the conversations that go there. CSI and corporate social responsibility is not a side of desk issue. It's not a separate issue. It's not something that gets waylaid. It is something that is inherently important to the organization's survival. And we need to be part of those conversations. So much as you may see yourself as having quite a lot of challenges in terms of understanding the area, also add to your challenge list as a professional within a business sector, the challenge of advocating internally for the importance of this work.
Sasha, coming to you in terms of I suppose the when we look at impact measurement, right? I think Kirsten, 100%, in terms of how corporates can practically go about, bringing social justice and human rights into their strategies, right? Aligning it to the business. I think you're 100% correct in terms of having that key linkage between, the business and the sector, as well as is key both internally and organizations such as, obviously the Social Justice Initiative and Section 27. But Sasha, turning to you, you mentioned in your opening, obviously, a number of instances or cases where you've been involved in, and those have often been long-term cases. I mean, the Michael Komape campaign, the Life is Sedimeni, and often corporate thinking is based around short-term and medium-term horizons, medium-term goals, medium-term measurement as well. How would you, what would be your message to corporates in terms of where there is support, thinking about, how do we measure, and even to the sector as well, how do we measure impact, and what should our thinking be around measuring impact, especially when you're talking about longer term horizons or longer term shifts in terms of policy development, whether it's litigation or even seeding programs?
Yeah, such an important question. I think, as you say, social justice is a long-term goal, and getting there is a very windy road, and it requires changes in strategy, it requires time. Sometimes we move forward and then we move back again. But I think just as corporates are able in their own work to identify short and medium and long-term goals, we do the same in the social justice sector. We're really quite experienced, particularly I think in the last decade, and maybe even to a greater extent in the last 5 years. Organizations have gotten a lot better at measuring and reflecting not only what we've done, but what it means and what it's led to in the short and the medium, as well as the end long goal. And we can demonstrate and celebrate the wins along the way to impact. So some of it is about articulating those wins along the way to impact, and appreciating that each of those are examples of progress. And I think that's what some of the corporates that do support social justice, like Standard Bank investing in this kind of work, are looking at is where are we intending to go, and what steps are we taking along the way, and how do we tell the story of what that means. An example might be, you mentioned the Michael Komape case. The Limpopo Department of Education is almost finished replacing the unsafe pit toilets. There are other issues there which remain another problem. But the fact that the Minister of Education is now speaking publicly about eradicating pit latrines is itself a point of impact. Even when some schools still have unsafe toilets. So I think we can identify those and we can communicate them. And perhaps it's for the sector also to make sure that we're communicating as well as possible, and recognizing the power of not just standard measurement metrics, but also other ways of reflecting impact, like the kind of storytelling, process storytelling. Just 2 days ago, we launched the Health and Human Rights Oral Histories Project, which looks at examples of global health activism and the process that has been taken. And just that way of reflecting oral histories and stories, I think, shows what progress has been made, but also how we can measure impact along the way on a long-term goal. So I don't think that this is something that necessarily has to divide CSIs and social justice organizations. I think we both have to see CSOs need to communicate this stuff better, and corporates need to recognize that there are steps along the way that are absolutely measurable, and that certainly contribute towards the longer term goal.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Sasha. Yoni, turning to you, and a comment that Zuziwe has posted, and I think it's aligned to a comment I made earlier, just in terms of, there is a lot of good work that's being done, and support that's being shown to development sectors and organizations by corporates, right? And how do we view this? But she says, I think that when we are looking at any social justice work, we have to recognize that all the issues are connected, I think, which was what I was trying to get to. From climate, Kirsten mentioned, just energy transition, you've got health, education, digital rights, in a modern society as well, access to justice. These issues are interconnected, Zuziwe says, and that is the systemic part that funders need to also consider and try to avoid working in silos. Now, an organization like yours plays a unique role in terms of you look at a number of areas of social justice. You bring people together, both funders and obviously implementing organizations as well. How do you think we need to shape or change our view of when we think of the development sectors? Because at times it can feel like it's an either or game. Either I have to do education, or I have to do GBV, or I have to do this, which is a reality, when you're working with limited resources. But a number of these things are interlinked,
Yeah, look, I think that corporates obviously find it easier, understandably, to navigate an issue rather than many different issues. And for corporates who feel that way, I wouldn't really feel very strongly about pushing them to change that approach. I think the input that I would have is more around, if you are focused on, let's say, education or health, you've got to understand the interlinking issues that cause the problems that you're trying to solve. And it might take place within the house of education or the house of healthcare, but there's different strands and different strings that you can pull to have impact there. And I think the main takeaway is more around understanding what the specific impacts that your interventions have are. If you are building a school, you're building a school, it's going to help X amount of learners. But obviously, you might also want that school to exist in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time. If you want that to, if that is your goal also, and you don't want to be the organization that is every single year making a grant to that specific school and that specific project, and you can never move on from that, you have to invest in the system. And so I don't think you need to then sit down at your place of work and think, oh, now we got to do climate and health and do all these many different things. No, make it simple for yourself. Identify the issue that you want to have an impact on: education, health, climate. If there's many of those, if you're a big enough corporate that you can have many of those, brilliant. If you are more, you want to go deeper on one issue, also brilliant. So for me, it's not saying, all of a sudden, throw the strategy out, throw what you have been trying to impact out. Not at all. Just see the bigger picture and try and adopt a more sustainable philanthropic approach to having the kind of change that you are aiming for.
Kirsten and Yoni, I want to pose the next one to you, because I think it's really important for many organizations out there, and obviously the structure and geographical outlay of our country. These things often play out with smaller organizations trying to do good work in smaller towns, where there are a number of various different challenges that one may not face in a big city here. And from your perspectives, Ricardo writes, how do the small town Dorpie organizations benefit from CSI initiatives? And I suppose it's both support from corporates, but also organizations like yours, Yoni, who can support these organizations. They're doing good work in communities where it's needed, but often they're not, tied into the system, the ecosystem that comes with being in a big city. Kirsten, let me start off with you from your perspective, at Standard Bank and as a corporate.
I think it's a very, very important point that is raised, because it links back to how do we know that we're having impact, and how do we know that we are actually achieving change. And also it links back to we can't be everywhere with everything for everyone, which is why I want to completely steal Yoni's point from right at the beginning, which is to say, take take your strategy, know where you can have direct impact. That is sort of what I would term very bluntly on the ground impact. Very, very like rough metrics, children fed, jobs created, houses built, etc. Whatever you want to have on the ground, number of NGOs supported. But then know in terms of sustainability, what are the programs of work that you're doing that may be embedded in those, but also broader than that, and working with organizations like Section 27 to actually change the system, because ultimately the system is going to just continue to perpetuate these problems, right? So I think what the comment is here is there is a very real need for NGOs on the ground who are doing the actual bricks and mortar work to be able to get funding. And that challenge is extreme, especially in the economic conditions in which we're in right now, and have to completely acknowledge that. And so, yes, it's very difficult. One of the things that we see a lot of the time is that organizations who are doing excellent work do not necessarily have all of the skills in terms of putting together a program that a large corporate would want to agree to. And then you need support to be able to say that this is how it's going to be audited, how the governance structures are going to be done. But also organizations need to equally be able to say that I don't need a full, long string due diligence on a particular organization in terms of who their finance director is and if they've got an external auditor, etc. It's about the work that happens on the ground. So tailor make your M&E, your governance structures for that. We will not be everywhere to everyone. Cannot say that we will be as a large corporate. However, one of the things I think corporates can probably do better is being able to be clearer on the areas in which they focus on. To say that, for example, I'm organization X and I stand for health benefits in maternal health, or I'm organization Y and I stand for XYZ. So, and those can change, but just be clear about it so that people know how to approach you, and be very clear in terms of how they can be approached. But then I think more systematically, and in terms of sustainability, is have a look and see, well, what is the system in which you're working in as an NGO as well, in terms of how are you working with the stakeholders within your community, the other NGOs in your community, the local government, if that is available, other particular organizations that may have been working in a similar space. And I know this is difficult. It's very easy to say, but it's very difficult because it can become very competitive in an environment where there are limited resources. But have a look and see how you can work in the full system. What I've seen a lot of corporates moving towards is looking towards not one single program, but a program of work that involves multiple NGOs. And I know for us, for instance, one of our key principles is that the sustainability of the NGOs in which that we work with is vitally important. During COVID, it was about keeping them running. It wasn't about saying, well, we have no more CSI money, so we're going to pull back. No, that was about you have this available, and actually we increased it during COVID to keep those NGOs afloat. So it's about the NGO sector as a whole, as a corporate looking at it. There's so many levels to be able to look at how this is nuanced. But my biggest advice would be try locate how you are working within a system that you're trying to improve. For example, education, health, water, sanitation, whatever that may be. Find out who else is doing work in that area and connect on that. And then link to the government initiatives that may be taking place in those areas so that you are able to see how you fit into the total system, and you are keyed into when there are resources available. As I said, easy to say, very difficult to do.
Yoni, on your perspective, I mean, in terms of the type of support that you offer organizations, smaller, implementers, NGOs, NPOs, what would your advice be to Ricardo?
Yeah, look, I think that historically Ricardo is probably problematizing an issue, which is that CBOs in the untraditional areas, what I mean by that, untraditionally supported by institutional philanthropy, have found it very difficult to source funding. I mean, the point is absolutely correct. The two things that I would say is that the SJI is trying to directly be of assistance there. One of our funds, which we have just started up and are still in the process of resourcing, called the Resilient Communities Fund, is focused particularly at smaller CBOs in areas that have been underserved by institutional philanthropy and CSI. But the second is to say to organizations in those spaces that unfortunately they still need to be knocking on doors. Yes, organizations in the main centers have a big advantage over them, but in today's day and age where people are operating much more online, it is perhaps less relevant that you are sitting next to a major corporate. You know, we are communicating over email, we're having Zoom calls. You know, you've got to knock on those doors. And if you are doing excellent work and you are making the case for that excellent work, I believe that there will be ears that are there to hear you, and hopefully from that, organizations that are in those locations can benefit. That latter point for me is the most important point. Organizations who are having an amazing impact, who are doing excellent work, their voices will rise to the top. They will be heard. They will be able to seek and find funding, at least from institutional philanthropy, where those organizations are structured in a way that they are able to receive that type of support. Collectively, though, we've also got to change the minds of corporate South Africa to radically scale the amount of money that is available to all organizations. And in that sense, I also do believe that a rising tide will lift all boats. And so if we also do that work, then smaller organizations will also benefit. Smaller organizations, of course, also have the benefit of being smaller. So the asks are more containable. They are maybe more boxable, for lack of a better word, by corporates who hopefully we are convincing in this call to be interested in organizations that are doing social justice work in those geographies. Yeah, just a few thoughts on that.
Thanks for that, Yoni, and some really good interaction on the comment box and the webinar chat box as well. Dominique replying to Zuziwe and Celeste, then asking questions around, you know, how can corporates be better linked to each other, you know, so that we're pooling resources, so that we're pooling thinking as well. You know, there are a myriad of challenges that we face in South Africa that are deep type of challenges, you know. Probably wicked problems, you know, hopefully not wicked problems by now. You know, you've got education, you've got health, you've got justice, you've got community development, you've got gender-based violences, and often they spill over into each other as well. And Audrey making the good point, you know, is this a role for BLSA? And you've got organizations like Business Leadership South Africa, you've got the National Business Initiative as well, who we have featured on our webinars before, and what they do is you know, similar to what this SJI does is have a broader overview and pulling people together so that you do have you can leverage the exponential impact of collaboration. And that's exactly what our theme was theme is for the latest handbook, is around collaboration. How do we collaborate to bring resources together, to bring pooling thinking together as well, so that we have a better coordinated approach to some of these problems, which are widespread and deep and cut across geographies as well. So thank you for that. Thank you for that interaction there on the webinar chat. We're coming to the end, and we have actually come to the end of today's discussion. I think it's been really rich. Thank you to our panelists as well. Time really has flown by. There's a lot more that we could unpack, but just for the last word, I'm going to turn to each of you for your 60-second takeaway or recommendation for companies and NPOs. I know it could be longer, but I think there's been so much rich, such concrete steps and a clearing up of the picture that's come through. So I really want to thank you for that as well. Kirsten, let me start with you. What's your one or two recommendations for companies and NPOs to consider, when working towards social justice and human rights?
So I think the first one is to be very, very clear on where social justice and human rights fits into your current and existing programs. You'll be surprised to see that you actually are focusing on many of these issues already. Be deliberate, pull them out, and be very clear on those. And then the second thing that I would suggest, and something that I think that we need to do more of, is working across partnerships and collaboration. So for example, look at if you're a business, have a look at your client list. Work with your client list to be able to maximize the type of impact that you're able to have. Do it in a way that is also very deliberate. This is a partnership approach. Take a business approach to this. I'm doing relationship management. I'm doing partnership building, and give it clear objectives that you're going to deliver. And then from an NGO and not-for-profit and a community-based organization sector, is find those partners, the collaborations, the other NGOs and other areas working in the same space. Make sure that those connections are solid and firm. When things are very, very tough, these are the types of connections that actually will bring you through. They're also the type of things, not just supporting you in terms of what you do, but the knowledge that you're sharing, but possibly also then connections to other donors and funders who are going to support you down the road.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kirsten, on that one. Sasha, over to you. What's your recommendation or takeaway that you'd like to leave us with?
Thanks, Sheldon. So I mean, firstly, corporate South Africa and all South Africans need to recognize that you're not going to achieve the social and economic goals by band-aid approaches. There's something deeper is needed here. I think secondly, just as you do your due diligence on a supplier or a prospective employee, so you can assure yourself that an advocacy organization or a social justice organization or any organization that you're looking to fund aligns with your values. It's not actually that complicated. And I think the last one is just that we need to recognize that corporates in South Africa bear a responsibility to make, just as they reap benefit from, a society and an economy that's better for all. And supporting social justice and advocacy organizations and civil society in general is one way to meet that responsibility. And I hope that more corporates start thinking in that way.
Yoni, your last one to bring us home.
Sure. I think it's to corporates to realize that there is a bigger impact that they can safely and powerfully be a part of, that doesn't compromise their values, that doesn't compromise their current philanthropic strategies, but rather enhances it. It makes it better. And the amazing part about all of this is that if you are thoughtful and considered, not only does it impact on your philanthropic goals, but it will also make your business better fundamentally, both in having a more values-based approach to existing in South Africa, but also very directly by creating the kind of society that produces the kinds of markets that your businesses need in order to be able to succeed. So be conscious and make the connections, draw the links between your CSI and your core business. You don't need to see these things as separate. One is going to quite directly and literally enhance the other. And when you're starting out, adopt something simple like a 70-30 rule. Keep supporting the projects that you are hoping to have direct and specific impact on, but devote part of your resources to supporting those interventions that you are supporting by improving the system holistically and hopefully long-term ensuring that the projects that you're invested in will succeed because the system helps them succeed, and that your philanthropy long-term will be able to spread far broader and wider than it currently is. I think that there's a tremendous amount of impact to be had out there by corporates, an impact that they will feel proud of, an impact that their employees will feel proud of, an impact that will also help their business and fundamentally will help South Africa as a whole.
Yoni, thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Kirsten Greenop, Sasha Stevenson, and Yoni Bass. Thank you very much. I think it's been truly insightful, but also some practical things that have come out of it. You know, the thinking around it's not just for your CSI departments. It's about how does the business work with its sphere of influence. You know, how does it work internally? How does it think of these various development sectors and the various challenges that we have in an interlinked systems approach type of way? So thank you very much for that as well. And really, I think clarifying the perceived risk, you know, that comes with, you know, social justice. I think there's certainly ways that exist for corporates to invest, number one. And as Sasha pointed out, you know, that it's the case studies have shown that there's very little blowback in that regard, actually, you know, when you look at it. So that's really great to hear. So thank you very much. I think those were the big takeaways for me as well. Thank you to you, our guests, for being with us today. Just a reminder that the video, the full webinar, will be made available to all who registered, as well as the article write-up from this, and that'll be mailed to you next week. There's a short pop-up survey that'll pop up here after this. Please, if you could just take some time to fill that out. It does help us to make these a lot to tailor these to what your needs are. And thank you very much for your interactions on the Q&A box and also on the chat. I want to leave it, and I think Louise Jones, who is a friend of Trialogue, she's been on the call, and I mean, I couldn't say it any better. She says corporates need to locate social justice as part of their sustainable business strategy, not see it as a CSI philanthropy, have broader stakeholder engagement policies, and have clear leadership advocating on critical issues there. I'm also going to pop a link into the chat box. You can read Louise Jones's piece from the Trialogue Business and Society Handbook, where she writes about why businesses should support social justice advocacy as well. So that's a really good piece for you to take away as well. Very practical. Thank you to everyone once again, and thank you for staying with us a bit over the 11 o'clock deadline, but truly is worth it. Thank you to our guests as well, our panelists, once again, for your input. It truly has been inspirational and informative as well. So until our next webinar, which will be in June, and the reason for that is we've got our Business and Society Conference coming up, where we will have the theme Impact. So look out for that on the Trialogue website for more on the program, the speakers, as well as venue and any other questions that you have. Book your spot today. I think we've actually crossed we've crossed halfway in terms of capacity there. So thank you very much. Register, and we look to see you. If we don't see you at the conference, we'll see you in June for our next webinar. Thank you.